The morning mist clung to the rows of white tombstones in Arlington National Cemetery, the air heavy with the weight of unspoken grief. Jackson Cole moved slowly between the graves, his boots pressing into the damp grass. His hands trembled around. The folded flag he carried, the same one they'd given him 3 years ago when they buried his son. Tyler's name was etched into the cold stone, the dates too close together, the explanation too thin. Training accident. That's all they'd said. No details, no witnesses. Just a coffin and a flag and a silence that had eaten away at Jackson. Ever since, he knelt, ignoring the ache in his knees, and ran his fingers over the letters of Tyler's name. The memories came like they always did, his boy laughing in the backyard. The day he'd enlisted, the last time Jackson had hugged him before deployment. But there was another memory, too, one that clawed at him in the quiet hours of the night. The phone call. The voice on the other end, too calm, too rehearsed. "We regret to inform you." A twig snapped behind him. Jackson didn't turn.
He was O's.
Used to the presence of other mourners, the quiet shuffles of visitors paying their respects. But the voice that spoke next wasn't gentle. "Sir, you can't stay here." Jackson blinked, his vision blurry. He hadn't realized he was crying. 2 police officers stood a few feet away, their expressions impatient. The taller one gestured toward the path. "You're causing a disturbance." Jackson frowned.
Ow.
Cemetery was nearly empty. The only sound was the distant cry of a crow. "I'm not disturbing anyone," he said, his voice rough. The second officer stepped closer. "You're on the ground, sir. It's against regulations." Jackson's grip tightened on the flag. He opened his mouth to explain about Tyler, about the anniversary, about the fact that he'd done this every year without issue, but the words stuck in his throat. Grief was a fist around his lungs. The taller officer sighed. "Last warning. Move along or we'll have to escort you." Out. Jackson didn't move. Couldn't? The weight of the last 3 years pressed down on him? And for a moment, he was back in that sterile military office, listening to a stranger tell him his son was gone. His knees sank deeper into the grass. The officers exchanged. A look, then a sharp click. Pain exploded through Jackson's body. His muscles locked, his back arching as the taser's current ripped through him. He collapsed onto Tyler's grave, the flag slipping from his fingers. Somewhere distantly, he heard himself cry out a raw, broken sound that echoed between the tombstones. What he didn't hear were the footsteps. 3 men in marine dress blues, moving in perfect unison, their faces like stone. They hadn't been there a minute ago. But now they stood between Jackson and the officers, their presence as sharp as a blade. The tallest marina captain, his medals gleaming, didn't raise his voice. But his words carried. "Step back." The officers froze. One of them opened his mouth, but the Marine cut him off with a look. Behind them, Jackson gasped for air, his fingers digging into the dirt above his son's grave. The last thing he saw before the world went black was the captain bending down, picking up the fallen flag with reverence and whispering 2 words, "We know." The world came back in fragments, cold metal against his wrists, the hum of fluorescent light, the stale taste of fear in his mouth. Jackson groaned, his body still throbbing from the taser's assault. He was in a holding cell, the kind with scuffed walls and a bench bolted to the floor. His head pounded, but worse than the pain was the humiliation. They dragged him away from Tyler's grave in cuffs, his son's flag left behind in the dirt. He squeezed his eyes shut, trying to block out the image. But it was burned into his mind. The way the officers had yanked him up like he was nothing. The stares of other visitors, the whispered crazy vet as they shoved him into the squat car. He'd spent 20 years in uniform, survived 2 tours, buried friends only to end up tased and locked up for grieving his own child. The injustice of it coiled in his chest like a snake, venomous and ready to strike. Then came the voices. Muffled at first, then sharp an argument brewing just beyond the door. One voice was the bored drawl of a desk sergeant. The other was low, controlled, and unmistakably military. The door flew open, and Jackson's vision filled with crisp dress blues. The same Marines from the cemetery stood there, their postures rigid, their eyes locked onto him. The captain, early 30s, with a scar running along his jawline, stepped forward. "Sergeant Cole," he said, and the way he said it wasn't a question, it was recognition. Behind him, the younger Marine, a lieutenant with sharp green eyes, held something in his hands. Tyler's flag neatly refolded. Jackson's breath hitched. "Who the hell are you?" "What?" The captain didn't blink. "Captain Daniel Shaw. This is Lieutenant Mark Rivas and Gunnery Sergeant Eli Ruiz. We served with your son." The names meant nothing to Jackson, but the way they stood like they were bracing for a fight told him this wasn't just a courtesy visit. Shaw's gaze flicked to the security camera in the corner, then back to Jackson. "We're getting you out of here. You need to listen carefully. When we walk out that door, you don't speak to anyone. Not the cops, not the press, no one. You come with us, and you don't ask questions until we're somewhere secure." Jackson's pulse spiked. This wasn't protocol. Marines didn't storm police stations to bail out strangers, even if they were the fathers of fallen brothers. Something was off. Something big. He glanced at the flag in Rivas's hands. "Why were you at the cemetery?" Ruiz, the oldest of the three, let out a humorless chuckle. "Same reason you were. Just didn't expect to see you get tased over it." Shaw shot him a warning look, then leaned closer to Jackson, his voice dropping to a whisper. "At Tyler's. Death wasn't an accident. If you want to know what really happened, you'll walk out of here with us right now." The words hit Jackson like a second taser shot. His throat tightened. All this time he'd suspected, known, that the official story was too clean, too convenient. But hearing it out loud from men who'd served beside his son made it real. In a way he wasn't prepared for. He swallowed hard, his mind racing. This could be a trap, a way to shut him up for good. But the look in Shaw's eyes wasn't deception, it was fury. The kind that came from years of biting your tongue. Jackson stood, his legs unsteady. "Let's go." The cops didn't stop them. No paperwork, no processing. Just silence, as the Marines flanked Jackson and marched him out like he was one of their own. The last thing he saw before the door closed behind him was the desk sergeant's face pale. He's nervous like a man who'd just realized he'd messed with the wrong people outside. A black SUV idled at the curb. Shaw opened the back door, but Jackson hesitated. "Where are we going?" Rivas glanced over his shoulder. "Somewhere they can't hear us." Jackson's skin prickled. They, not the cops. Not the military. They. Whoever had erased the truth. About Tyler. He climbed in, the flag resting heavy in his lap. The engine roared to life, and as the SUV pulled away, Jackson caught a glimpse of a second car dark, unmarked, teasing out of a parking spot a block behind them, following Shaw. Saw it too. His jaw tightened. Gunny, lose them. Ruiz smirked and slammed the gas. The SUV wove through the streets of D.C. with practiced precision, cutting down narrow alleys and darting through intersections just as the lights turned red. Jackson braced himself against the door, his knuckles white as Ruiz executed a sharp turn that sent the tires screeching. In the side mirror, the unmarked car was still there, stubborn as a shadow. Shaw cursed under his breath and pulled out his phone, typing a rapid series of messages before tossing it onto the dashboard. "Change of plans," he said, his voice tight. "We're not going to the safe house." Rivas, riding shotgun, didn't ask. Questions just nodded and reached into the glove compartment, pulling out a handgun and checking the magazine with a practiced flick of his wrist. The casualness of the motion sent a chill down Jackson's spine. These weren't just Marines. They were men who had been living with danger long enough to treat it like routine. Jackson forced himself to speak, voice steadier than he felt. "Who's following us?" Shaw didn't look at him. "People who don't want you hearing what we have to say." The SUV lurched again as Ruiz took a sudden left, throwing Jackson against the seatbelt. The city blurred outside the windows, storefronts and pedestrians, reduced to streaks of color. Then, without warning, Ruiz slammed the brakes, sending the vehicle skidding into a dimly lit underground parking garage. The unmarked car shot past the entrance, its brake lights flaring red as the driver realized too late that they'd lost their target. Ruiz killed the engine, and for a moment the only sound was the ragged breathing of four men, who knew how close they'd just come to something ugly. Shaw exhaled sharply. "We're clear, for now," turned to Jackson, his expression grim. "You understand yet? This isn't just about Tyler. It's about all of us." Jackson's stomach twisted. He'd spent 3 years drowning in grief. But now, for the first time, he felt something else, something worse. The slow, creeping horror of realizing his son had been part of something far bigger than a training accident. Looked down at the flag in his lap, the fabric worn at the edges from years of being folded and unfolded, carried and clutched like a talisman. "Tell me," he said, the words raw. "Tell me what happened to my boy." Rivas and Ruiz exchanged a glance, but Shaw didn't hesitate. Tyler was recruited into a Black Ops program called Project Aegis. Officially, it didn't exist. Unofficially, it was a bioweapons initiative. They tested experimental enhancers drugs designed to push soldiers beyond human limits. Faster reflexes. No pain, no fear. Shaw's voice dropped lower. Like even here, in the belly of a parking garage, the walls might have ears. But the side effects were ... catastrophic. Men started losing their minds. Hallucinations. Violent episodes. Tyler was exposed during a field trial. Instead of extracting him, they quarantined the unit and called in an airstrike. Made it look like enemy fire. The air left Jackson's lungs like he'd been punched. He'd imagined 100 different scenarios: friendly fire, negligence, even suicide. But this was monstrous. His hands shook, not from fear, but from a rage so deep it threatened to swallow him whole. "And the others?" he managed. Ruiz's face darkened. "We were the cleanup crew, sent in after the accident to retrieve whatever was. Left, we found Tyler's journal. He'd figured out what was happening. Knew they were going to bury it." He tapped the folded flag. "That's why we've been watching you. We knew they'd come for anyone who started asking questions." Jackson's mind raced. The police at the cemetery, the unmarked car. This wasn't just to cover a pit. It was an active operation. He'd just become a target. He met Shaw's gaze. What? Now, Shaw's mouth curved into a humorless smile. "Now, we go to war." The SUV's engine roared back to life as Ruiz pulled out of the garage, heading not toward the heart of the city, but away from it to the shadows, where secrets lived and men like them could move unseen. Behind them, unnoticed by any of them, a security camera in the garage's corner swiveled silently. Tracking their exit, the safe house was a crumbling brick row house on the outskirts of D.C. It's the kind of place that had been forgotten by time and city planners. Boards covered the lower windows, and the front steps sagged under their weight. But the moment Jackson stepped inside, he realized appearances were deceiving. The interior was a stark contrast to the exterior: clean, organized, and wired with enough tech to make a Pentagon IT specialist sweat. Monitors lined one wall, flickering with live feeds from security cameras Jackson couldn't see. A bank of radios hissed with encrypted chatter, and a massive corkboard dominated the far wall, covered in photos, maps, and red string connecting. Names and dates like some detective's fever dream. A woman stood in front of the board, her back to them as she pinned a new document into place. She didn't turn when the door opened, just called over her shoulder, "Took you long enough." Shaw sighed. "We had company." That made her turn. She was younger than Jackson, expected mid-30s, with sharp hazel eyes and dark hair pulled into a tight ponytail. She wore a fitted black sweater and cargo pants. No makeup, no pretense. Her gaze locked onto Jackson, assessing him in a single glance. "So this is him." Jackson bristled. "And you are?" "Lieutenant Cassandra Vale," she said, crossing her arms. "Formerly of DIA, currently of burned bridges and bad decisions." Shaw rubbed his temples. "Vale's our inside source? Or was before she leaked classified files and got herself labeled a traitor?" Vale smirked. "Semantics?" She jerked her chin toward the board. "You want to know what happened to your son? That's it. Every piece of the puzzle we've managed to scrape together." Jackson stepped closer, his eyes scanning the chaos of information. Photos of men in uniforms, some he recognized as Tyler's unit, others strangers. Ow. medical reports with entire paragraphs blacked out, emails with subject lines like containment protocol and termination order, and in the center of it all, a single, grainy image of Tyler, alive but barely, his face gaunt, his eyes hollow, hooked up to IVs in a room that looked more like a lab than a medbay. Jackson's throat tightened. Where was this taken? Vale's expression softened. Just for a second. Black site in Poland. One of their testing facilities. She tapped the photo. This was 2 days before they reported him Kia. He wasn't dead yet, but he was close. The room swayed. Jackson gripped the edge of the table to steady himself. All this time, he'd imagined Tyler dying quick. Clean a bullet, an explosion, something instant. Not this. Not strapped to a bed while his body turned against him. His voice came out ragged. Why? Vale exhaled, because he found out the truth. Project Aegis wasn't just about enhancing soldiers. It was about creating weapons. And when the test subjects started showing side effects, paranoia, aggression, organ failure, they didn't shut it down. They doubled down. Tyler was going to expose them. She hesitated, then pulled a folded piece of paper from her pocket. He managed to get this out before they locked him down. Jackson took it with trembling hands. Unfolding it revealed Tyler's handwriting, shaky but unmistakable. Dad, if you're reading this, I'm already gone. Don't believe what they tell you. It wasn't an accident. They're lying. All of them. There's a facility in Virginia. Coordinates 38.8821N. 77.1713W. That's where they're keeping the evidence. Find it. Make sure the world knows. I love you. The date at the bottom was 3 days before Tyler's official death. Jackson's vision blurred. He'd spent years drowning in grief, but now, for the first time, he had a purpose, a target. He looked up at Vale, at the Marines, his voice low and steady. What's at those coordinates? Shaw's jaw tightened. At Aegis's stateside lab. And our next stop. Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance. The storm was coming. The rain came down in sheets as the SUV barreled down the deserted backroads of rural Virginia, windshield wipers fighting a losing battle against the storm. Jackson sat in silence, Tyler's note clutched in his hand like a holy text, the coordinates. Burning in his mind, every bump in the road, every flash of lightning, ratcheted the tension tighter. Vale rode shotgun, her fingers flying across a tablet as she pulled up satellite images of their destination. Facilities disguised as an abandoned textile plant, she said, zooming in on a cluster of crumbling buildings surrounded by overgrown fields. But look here, she tapped the screen, highlighting a section of the roof. Solar panels. And that's a damn power substation for a place that's supposed to be derelict. Ah. Shaw leaned forward from the back seat, studying the image. Guards always, 2 at the main gate, rotating patrols, motion sensors along the perimeter. Vale glanced at Jackson. They'll have shoot-to-kill orders for trespassers. Jackson didn't flinch. Then we don't trespass. We walk right in. Ruiz let out a low whistle from the driver's seat. Hell of a suicide plan, Sarge. It's not suicide if we have this. Hey. Vale reached into her bag and pulled out a military ID badge, freshly forged, Jackson realized, with his face and a fake rank, courtesy of a friend at Langley. We're a DOT inspection team, here for a surprise audit. Should buy us at least 15 minutes before someone checks the credentials. Shaw took the badge, examining it. And after that, Vale's smile was all teeth. After that, we improvise. The facility loomed out of the rain like a graveyard of industry, its chain-link fence topped with razor wire, the old factory's windows boarded shut. The SUV rolled to a stop at the gate, and Jackson's pulse spiked as a guard approached. His rifle slung casually over one shoulder. Vale lowered her window, flashing her best bureaucratic scowl. Department of Defense. Unannounced compliance inspection. She thrust the forged paperwork into the guard's hands. Open the gate. The man frowned, scanning the documents. Jackson held his breath, his hand drifting toward, the pistol tucked into his waistband. One wrong move, and this would turn into a bloodbath. Then, miraculously, the guard nodded. Didn't get word about any inspection. Vale rolled her eyes. That's why it's called unannounced. Call your CO if you want, but I'd love to explain why you delayed a DOT audit. Guard hesitated, then waved them through. Inside, the facility was a nightmare masquerading as a lab. Fluorescent lights buzzed over stainless steel tables littered with syringes and vials of cloudy liquid. Medical charts lined the walls. Filled with terms Jackson didn't recognize but understood all too well: neurological degradation, accelerated cellular decay. And in the center of the room, a glass-walled containment cell, its floor still stained. Dark in places, Vale went straight for a computer terminal, plugging in a thumb drive. Downloading everything. Shaw, keep watch. Ruiz. Check those filing cabinets. Jackson stepped toward the containment cell, his boots sticking slightly to the floor. He pressed a hand against the glass, imagining Tyler there, scared and alone. His reflection stared back at him, hollow. Then the alarms blared. Shit. Vale yanked out the drive. They're locking us down. Shaw sprinted to the door, peering into the hallway. Armed response team, 30 seconds out. Ruiz racked his rifle. Back door? Won't matter. The place will be swarming. Shaw turned to Jackson. Grim. Got what you came for? Jackson looked down at the files in his hands, Tyler's name on half of them. Not yet. Outside. Boots pounded on concrete. Vale grinned. Let's give them a distraction. She tossed a smoke grenade into the hall. The last thing Jackson saw before the room. Filled with chaos was Tyler's face on a monitor, alive, terrified. As the system's final message flashed. Subject terminated. Cover-up authorized. The smoke grenade exploded with a hiss. Thick gray plumes billowing into the hallway like a living thing. Jackson barely had time to grab the files before Shaw was shoving him toward the emergency exit, shouting over the blaring alarms. Move. Go. Go. Gunfire erupted behind them, sharp, controlled bursts from Ruiz's rifle, followed by the heavier return fire of the response team. A bullet shattered a monitor above Jackson's head, raining glass down onto the lab floor. Vale was already at the exit, slamming her palm against the emergency release. The door didn't budge. Locked down. She snarled, yanking a small device from her vest and slapping it against the control panel. Sparks flew as the override fried. The system, and with a groan, the door slid open just enough to squeeze through. Jackson didn't hesitate. He dove through the gap, the others right behind him, as another volley of gunfire chewed into the metal doorframe. The emergency stairwell was dimly lit, the air thick with the smell of mildew and old concrete. They took the steps, 2 at a time, Ruiz covering their rear, his rifle trained on the doorway below. Where now? Jackson gasped, clutching the files. To his chest, like they were the only thing keeping him alive, Vale panted. Extraction in 90 seconds. Jackson didn't ask how she knew that. He just ran. The rooftop access door was rusted shut, but Shaw hit its shoulder first, bursting through into the storm. Rain lashed at their faces, the wind howling like something alive. Jackson squinted through the downpour. No helicopter, no escape. Just the empty rooftop and the distant flicker of lightning. Then Vale pulled a flare from her belt and ignited it, the bright red light cutting through the storm. For a terrifying second, nothing happened. Then from the darkness, an unmarked black helicopter roared into view, its rotors whipping the rain into a frenzy. The side door slid open, revealing a figure in tactical gear waving them aboard. Go, Shaw barked, shoving Jackson forward. They sprinted across the rooftop. Ruiz still firing behind them at the first guards to spill out of the stairwell. Jackson reached the helicopter first, scrambling inside as hands hauled him up. Vale and Shaw followed, but Ruiz's bullet caught him in the leg. He went down hard. Skidding across the wet concrete, Jackson didn't think. He lunged back out of the helicopter, grabbing Ruiz's vest and dragging him toward the chopper as gunfire peppered the ground around them. Shaw seized Ruiz's other arm, and together they hauled him inside just as the pilot yanked the aircraft skyward. The last thing Jackson saw as they banked away was the facility's roof swarming with armed men. Their weapons raised uselessly as the storm swallowed them whole. Inside the helicopter, Ruiz gritted his teeth as Vale tied a tourniquet around his leg. Damn, that's going to leave a mark. Shaw ignored him, turning to Jackson. You got the files? Jackson nodded, his hand shaking as he opened the folder. Inside were photos, medical reports, and a single sheet of paper with a list of names Tyler's at the top. The heading read * termination. Schedule. Vale's face went pale. Oh my God. Jackson's blood turned to ice. This wasn't just a cover-up. It was a purge. And Tyler hadn't been the first. The helicopter ride was a blur of adrenaline and dread. Jackson clutched the files like they might disintegrate, his mind reeling from what he'd just read. Termination schedule. The words were clinical, bureaucratic, but the meaning was monstrous. Tyler hadn't just been killed to silence him. He'd been scheduled, planned, like some faulty piece of equipment to be discarded. Vale was already on the radio, her voice sharp over the rotor's roar. We need immediate evac to the safe. Zone package secured, but we've got hostiles on high alert. Shaw leaned in, his face grim under the dim cabin lights. That list, it's not just names, it's proof. Proof they knew the enhancers were killing their own men, and they kept dosing them anyway. Jackson's hands tightened into fists. How many? Enough to bury the Pentagon in lawsuits? Vale pulled a flash drive from her pocket, the data she'd stolen from the lab. But this is the knife to their throat. Lab results, emails, even video logs of the subjects deteriorating. They can't spin this. Not unless they kill every last one of us. The helicopter banked sharply, throwing them against the seats. Outside, the storm raged. Lightning splitting the sky like a warning. * 3 days later. * the footage aired at 8 p.m. prime time. It wasn't just the files. It was Tyler's face, gaunt, feverish, pleading into a hidden camera as his hands shook. They're lying to us. The injections aren't making us stronger. You're eating us alive. By 8:15, Capitol Hill was in chaos. By midnight, the Secretary of Defense had resigned. Jackson sat in a nondescript hotel room. Watching the fallout on live TV, Shaw, Ruiz, and Vale were gone, scattered to safe houses, their faces now as infamous as his. The press called them whistleblowers. Heroes, the Pentagon called them traitors. None of it mattered. What mattered was the folded flag on the nightstand. What mattered was the new headstone being carved right now at Arlington, the one that would read * Private First Class Tyler Cole. * not forgotten, not silent, not in vain. Knock at the door. Jackson didn't reach for his gun. He already knew who it was. The journalist from the Washington Post stood there, her eyes wide with the thrill of the scoop. Mr. Cole, do you have a statement? Jackson looked past her at the sunrise bleeding over the city. Yeah, he said. This isn't over. Somewhere, in a locked office deep inside the Pentagon, a phone rang. No one answered. 3 weeks later, a black sedan pulled up to a remote farmhouse in Montana. The man who stepped out wore no uniform, but his posture screamed military. He knocked twice, then spoke to the doorbell camera. Captain Shaw. We have a problem. Inside, Shaw lowered his rifle. The voice was familiar. It was the president's.
Subscribe and press the bell icon so that you never miss the amazing video.